Hey guys, tonight we step into moonlit sand, whispering tapestries, and one very talkative deer. You're going to fall headfirst into a story buried in velvet dust and wrapped in spellwork, one that starts with a merchant, a fruit pit, and a promise he can't take back. A warning, you probably won't survive this story if you ask too many questions. Reality gets wobbly in here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and the time right now. I love seeing where in the world you're dozing off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Baghdad, or what Baghdad used to be before time became a straight line. There's incense curling from lamps lit with fish oil, and carpets that don't fly, but definitely threaten to if you stare too long. You walk beneath crumbling arches and strange stars. The night unusually loud with silence, somewhere, far from the noise. A man travels alone. He's a merchant, successful, perhaps too much so. The kind of man who measures his wealth in silk bolts and shipping weights, not feelings. He's got 3 camels, one fainting from exhaustion, and dust caked into his eyebrows like it's trying to claim him. You watch him stop in a grove. It's dry. Sure. But there's one pathetic tree pretending to be generous. He takes a date from his pouch, leathery, overripe, probably from last year, pops it in his mouth, and, like any absent-minded traveler would, he flicks the pit into the wind. It lands with a soft thunk, and immediately a roar slices the air like a blade. The earth yawns open, and up from it rises a giant. Not the fairy tale kind with golden harps and gentle clumsiness. No, this one has burning eyes and a scimitar the length of your sleep schedule. This is a djinn, older than the desert, and twice as unforgiving. "You killed my son!" The djinn booms. The merchant, who was just debating whether he'd forgotten to lock his warehouse, freezes. "Excuse me?" he says. "The date pit you tossed," the djinn says, voice thick as thunder. "Struck my invisible son and killed him instantly." There are many moments in your life where you question cause and effect. This is one of them. You didn't think date pits were deadly. Historians still argue whether the invisible children of jinn were real folklore or just poetic justice for littering. The merchant, faced with death by sky giant, does something most people wouldn't. He bargains. "I'm sorry," he says. "Let me go home, settle my affairs. I'll come back in 1 year to be executed properly, with dignity." You think this would be a hard no. But the jinn, strangely honorable, pauses. Ancient beings do enjoy formality, after all. And maybe there's a little bit of drama they savor in waiting. "Fine," the jinn growls. 1 year. Come back here next New Year's Day, and if you're not here, I will level Baghdad. Just for fun. Fair, so the merchant returns home. Not to flee, not to fake his death, but to actually set his affairs in order. You'd think he'd tell his friends he's going to die by giant ghost murder, but no. He handles his business, settles debts, arranges for the care of his pets. He has a talking parrot named Mustafa who swears like a sailor, and when the year passes, he rides back toward the grove. As you walk with him, there's something oddly peaceful about it. The way a condemned man walks when he knows his fate, but not his ending. Maybe you relate. Maybe you've had exams like that. He arrives at the grove with the same solemn dignity of someone returning a library book a decade late. But before the jinn can swing his cosmic scimitar, someone interrupts. It's not a soldier, not a hero. It's an old man, leading a deer on a golden rope. You blink. This is not what you expected. The old man has a face like sun-cracked clay and eyes like he's lived through 4 apocalypses and still has opinions about them. The deer looks at you sideways, expression unreadable, like it knows more than it should. The old man asks, "What's going on here?" The djinn, annoyed, explains, "This merchant killed my son. I gave him a year. He's here. I'm about to kill him." "Oh," says the old man. "Would you accept a story in exchange?" The djinn, who's already delayed murder for the sake of drama once, considers it. "Maybe, if it's entertaining, and if it's true. If I tell you a story so strange, so impossible, you'll spare 1/3 of this man's life?" The old man presses. 1/3? Says the djinn, puzzled. The old man nods. "There are 3 of us. Coming. You'll see." The djinn, now thoroughly intrigued, grunts in reluctant agreement. "Fine. 1 story. 1 share." So the first old man settles down, the deer curling beside him like a cat. You sit too, because clearly the laws of physics have gone home for the evening. And as the fire crackles and stars blink overhead like nervous spectators, the old man begins. "I was once a merchant too," he says. "But my tale is not about trade. It's about betrayal, about magic, and about how this very deer beside me was once..." He pauses. The deer stares forward. "My wife," and you don't breathe, not because it's scary, but because it's about to get really complicated. In ancient courts, love and vengeance were often separated by a single spell. Mainstream records show wives in folklore occasionally used potions or charms to bend loyalty, or to exact it. But what this old man describes next is more than just potions and jealousy. It's alchemy, marriage, beast shifting, and the sort of domestic drama that ends not with therapy, but with species reassignment. Somewhere in the shadows, the djinn leans closer, sharp-toothed and curious. "And you? You forget entirely that someone might still die by sunrise, because stories, especially in the old world, always came with a price, and this one is just getting started." You lean in, careful not to blink too loudly, as the old man shifts in place. His robe rustles like dried parchment, and his eyes gleam, not with malice, but with that distant sort of fatigue people have when they've explained something 1,000 times and still can't believe it ever happened. "My wife," he says again, gesturing softly toward the deer beside him. She lowers her head, ears flicking as if she resents the attention. "She was not always so quiet." He adjusts his shawl and exhales like someone who once owned a lot of rugs and lost them all to emotional decisions. "I was wealthy," he begins. "Not just moderately so. I had estates, vineyards, courtyards with tiled fountains and songbirds trained to harmonize with the wind chimes. My wife, young, clever, pretty enough to make mirrors jealous, was everything I thought I needed." Ah, yes, the classic historical setup. Historians agree that in the tales of the Abbasid Golden Age, wealthy men married for many reasons, but almost never for peace of mind. And you? You can already smell trouble, thick as rose water. The old man continues, voice as smooth as oiled walnut. "I was away often. My trade routes stretched across deserts and seas, Egypt, Samarkand. I even did a brief stint in Sicily. Nice olives, terrible poets. And every time I returned, I brought gifts, perfumes that could make flowers blush, jewels. One time, a mechanical parrot that recited poetry by accident. He chuckles. No one else does. But then, the air changes. Just a little. She grew bored, he says, eyes hardening. Too much silk and too little attention. And when women with minds like knives get bored, they sharpen them on secrets. You shift, feeling the weight of the story press into you. It's not jealousy you smell. It's something older, something alchemical. One day, he returned from a trip to Basra with 3 new perfumes and a camel that only responded to compliments. He walked into the house, and the silence was not just eerie. It was off. Rooms he'd left locked were open. Doors usually warm with incense were cold. And then I found it, he mutters. A book, not hidden, not buried, just carelessly tossed on her vanity table. A tome of transformations. Now, you and I know what that means. These weren't just recipe books for beauty creams and herbal teas. These were thick, leather-bound manuals inked in languages that hadn't been spoken aloud in centuries. Most mainstream scholars believe that such grimoires, yes, that's your fun word for the night, were mostly allegorical. But a fringe group of medievalists argue some held real rituals. Rituals involving metamorphosis. Or worse, revenge. The old man had read just enough to understand the book's nature, and to realize one of the rituals had been used. Recently, he narrows his eyes at the deer. She looks away. My wife, he says, had been studying transformation magic for months. She had taken a lover, one of my servants. Yes, cliché, I know. And she intended to keep him. But she didn't just send me away. She made plans to remove me. You raise your eyebrows. As far as relationship problems go, that's creative. But wait, there's more! She used a potion, slipped it into his tea one lazy evening after dinner and before the lute player had started. You watch as the old man mimics the moment, lifting a cup to his lips, never realizing the betrayal floating inside. It wasn't poison, he says. That would have been easy. No, she wanted humiliation. He blacked out. And when he awoke, he was not himself. No, he was a dog, a shaggy, gray, drooling creature, loyal, confused, and cursed. The deer beside him makes a small noise in her throat. Half whimper, half exasperation. You swear if she had eyebrows, they'd be rolled skyward. And so, he says, I became her pet, her dog, forced to sleep on woven mats beside the stairs, to eat scraps. She laughed when I barked. She trained me to sit. Okay, this is where you might ask, could a transformation spell really suppress memory and language and self-awareness? Historians still argue whether these tales were symbolic, men feeling powerless in their homes, or literal warnings of magical domestic politics gone rogue. The old man shakes his head. She ruled my household, my estate, and my brother. He trails off, throat tightening. He thought I'd abandoned everything, vanished. It lasted 3 years, 3 full years. You picture it, a proud merchant, now a mutt, padding through marble halls, his wife ruling the roost with painted nails and poisonous charm. The kind of poetic justice that only really works if you're not the one getting neutered. But then, something shifted. On the 3rd year, she made a mistake, he says. She brought the lover home, publicly, declared him master of the house. A wedding was planned. And in that moment of hubris, her guard slipped. The old man, still trapped in dog form, was allowed to wander. He found the book again. Or rather, it found him, buried beneath laundry, pages half melted by humidity, but still humming with power. Now comes your fringe fact. Some medieval alchemical texts were said to bond with their first reader, reshaping themselves to respond only to that soul. Wild, right? Not widely accepted, but mentioned in a 12th century Andalusian commentary that might have been satire. Whatever the case, he touched the book, and it opened, slowly, haltingly. Something inside him remembered how to read. Maybe not with eyes. Maybe not with words. But with something deeper. Like bones learning language again. He barked one day and the spell cracked. Not broken, but loosened. Enough to regain part of himself. Enough to run. So he fled out of the house, through alleyways, chased by servants who thought the prized hound had gone rabid. And then, luck, or fate, or maybe just the chaos of magic. He collided with a traveler, a woman in green, a sorceress, though she looked no older than a librarian. She looked at him once and said, "That's not a dog." You and I both know. When someone in a fairy tale says that, they're usually right. She brought him home, fed him, watched him, and finally asked, "Do you want to be you again?" He barked. She nodded. And thus, he says, my fate began to unroll. Not unravel. Unroll. Like a carpet too old to fold properly. You smile. The deer glances up. Maybe amused. Maybe just itchy. And the fire crackles on. You barely breathe as the old man stares into the fire. The flames casting shadowy flickers across his weathered face. His voice drops to a near whisper. Soft enough that you lean in just a little closer. Like you're about to be let in on something almost too strange to say aloud. She told me the spell was complex, he murmurs. Woven with intention, with emotion, and with blood. And here you were, thinking tea parties were the most dangerous thing in old palaces. But no, apparently betrayal needs a full magical recipe book and a teaspoon of spite. The green-robed sorceress, as he called her, wasn't just some street corner charmer with a few shiny stones and dramatic eyeliner. She was trained, steeped in the old arts. Not the kind that summon demons, too loud, but the sort that bends the soul, shifts the self, uncorks the truth. Before we could reverse the spell, he says. She needed to know everything. And so he did something he hadn't done in years, something more terrifying than barking. He remembered. He sat, still in the shape of a dog, and let her read him, not like a book, but like a fire reads dry wood. She pulled forth every memory, every betrayal, every glass of spiced wine that had hidden a lie. His heart was ladled out like soup. She said I had to forgive. He adds, almost bitterly. Not for her sake, for mine. You wince. That's classic magical therapist talk. Forgiveness as a key to transformation? Sounds suspiciously convenient, but hey, maybe that's why it keeps showing up in old texts. So he did it. With gritted teeth or, well, snarled gums, he let go. And the next morning, his paws became hands. But it wasn't a clean shift. There was pain, a kind of stretching, not just of muscle, but of memory. Historians have noted that in many shape-shifting tales of the Islamic Golden Age, transformations often come with a cost. Some lose language, others age backward. A few, reportedly, gain the power of speech but lose their shadow. Make of that what you will. The old man had aged just a little, like his bones had soaked up the time he lost. But he was human again. And I thanked her, he says. And she nodded like I'd just passed a test no one really wanted to take. Then, he asked what you're probably thinking. What now? Well, revenge, of course. But not the bloody, sword-swinging kind. Oh no, this was personal, elegant. He returned to his city dressed as a traveling scholar. Masked, cloaked. His house was still in his name. Legally, anyway, but entirely under the control of his wife and her new husband, who'd redecorated the courtyard with tasteless sculptures and added a goat fountain for some reason. First, I reclaimed my name, he says. Quietly, the sorceress gave him papers. Forged? Possibly. Enchanted? Likely. He presented them to the local magistrate who, coincidentally, owed the green-robed woman a favor involving a certain missing manuscript and an embarrassing spell gone wrong. The record was corrected. Then came the trickier part. I couldn't simply walk in and take over, he says, cracking his knuckles. She would have vanished, so I had to set a trap. Cue dramatic pause. You're hooked, I know. But hold on to that pillow, because this gets stranger. He threw a public feast, under a new name, invited everyone who mattered. Poets, musicians, 3 minor princes, and his own wife and her lover. They didn't recognize me, he says with a smirk. She even commented on how much I resembled her late husband, he adds, rolling his eyes. I told her it was a tragic coincidence. You stifle a laugh, the deer snorts. Now here's your historical nugget. Such feasts, public, opulent, and coded with hidden intentions, were often used in medieval courts for everything from marriage negotiations to veiled threats. The concept of masking identity in this way wasn't just literary flair. It was survival strategy. At the height of the evening, as wine flowed and dancers spun, he offered entertainment, a demonstration of ancient magic. She laughed, he says, until I brought out the book. Not the one she'd used, but one like it. A twin, gifted by the sorceress. He opened it slowly, theatrically, read a few lines aloud, and before anyone could object, he tossed a pinch of powder into the air. A shimmer, he says, like heat rising from stone, and then, in full view of dozens of witnesses, her lover, her so-called husband, changed into a dog. Still well-groomed, he adds. Not cruel, just poetic. There was panic, of course, screaming. The goat fountain was knocked over. A lute got stepped on. And then the old man turned to his wife. She knew, he says. In that moment, she knew. I was me, but it was too late for apologies. She tried to cast something. He's not sure what. A curse? A counterspell? A plea? But the book in his hands was older, stronger, and still warm with his own sorrow. He spoke once more, and she turned into a deer, a graceful, trembling thing, all memory intact, all regret intact. She's remained like this ever since, he says, reaching out and brushing her muzzle with a slow hand. I keep her safe. I protect her. But I do not forgive her. Here's your fringe tidbit. In some obscure North African versions of this tale, the deer occasionally speaks at night, whispering apologies into the wind, whether hallucination or haunting. Who can say? He turns his gaze back to you. And so, he finishes, when I saw this demon in the desert demanding a life for a single date, I thought, what better time to finally use the favor I was given? The demon, if you remember, is still hovering, arms crossed, eyebrow arched. He's been listening this whole time. You, meanwhile, are wondering, did he really turn his wife into a deer? Is she truly remorseful? Or is she biding her time, waiting for a moonlit night when she can break the spell with a twist of hoof and horn? Historians still argue whether these transformations were metaphors, marriages frozen in trauma, or if real magical lineages passed down such arts like heirlooms. But the old man isn't interested in debate. He straightens his back, and with a bow to the demon, he says, if her story moved you even a little, grant me 1/3 of the merchant's life. The demon narrows his glowing eyes. The wind picks up, swirling sand around your ankles. A pause so thick it practically hums. And then, well, the demon says, that was unexpected. You don't dare move. The silence around you is as tight as a drum, stretched between the demon's narrowing eyes and the old man's soft, steady breath. The deer at his side presses closer to his leg. as though she knows that some kind of judgment is about to fall, and she's not eager to be on the wrong side of it. The demon, this towering, time-stained thing made of smoke and shadow and ancient spite, clicks his tongue once, as if deeply inconvenienced by the whole business. You notice his claws twitch, not with violence, with calculation. "Very well," he says at last. "Your story has earned you a third of this man's life." The merchant breathes out. It's a pitiful little exhale, like air leaking from a dying bellows. You feel a surge of relief. Maybe now, maybe he's got a chance. But the demon isn't done. "One," the demon says, raising a clawed finger. "Does not a pardon make?" And just like that, the sand behind you shifts again. Another voice, younger, more musical, more theatrical, honestly, slices through the stillness. "I believe," the voice says, "that I too may be of use." Everyone turns, even the demon. There, emerging from the dunes like someone who's rehearsed this entrance for weeks, comes the second old man. Only he doesn't look old. Exactly. Not in the usual way. His beard is white, sure, but his back is straight, and his clothes are rich. Velvets and silk in shades of deep indigo and dusty pearl, one shoulder draped with a cage. Inside the cage, a pair of hounds. Beautiful, silver-coated hounds with eyes that seem far too human. The first old man bows slightly. "Brother," he says. "Companion." The second returns, nodding. You wonder how many of these sorceress men are just wandering the wilderness on any given Tuesday. The demon, clearly amused, gestures lazily. If you have a tale equal in weight to the last, go on, then. But no poetry. He adds, "I loathe poetry before dusk." The second man laughs softly. No verses, only memories. And so he begins. "You're swept into the next tale like a leaf on water. I was once a wealthy man," he says. Not unlike our merchant here, though I suspect I had fewer questionable pacts with fruit-eating demons. Even the demon snorts. "I had 3 brothers," he continues, "all of them fools." You nod. That checks out. Stories with 3 brothers almost never end well. We shared a fortune left by our father. Land, livestock, gold, and for a time, things were balanced, until they decided they wanted to make more of it. He raises an eyebrow. By going into trade, cue dramatic pause. He lets the silence linger like wine on the tongue. But, he adds, they knew nothing about trade. They knew how to spend, how to boast, and how to gamble. That's all. You shift a little, feeling the sand cool beneath you. The dogs in the cage lie still, almost like they're listening too. They each took their share and left the city, he says, promising to return with caravans full of riches and wisdom. They came back with neither. They lost everything, he says simply. And so, naturally, they came to me. Of course they did. I gave them more, from my own share, because, fool that I was, I believed blood mattered more than sense. And history backs him up. Kind of. In many accounts from Abbasid-era Baghdad, sibling loyalty was seen as both sacred and suspicious. You helped your kin, but you also locked your coin box first. They failed again, he says, utterly. He pauses and tilts his head. The third time, I refused. You feel the turn before he says it. You can already smell the betrayal. And so, one night, as I slept in my courtyard, he says, they came, with wine laced in poppy, with hands that once held mine as children. They bound me. Here's your scholarly debate moment. Some argue this part of the tale is metaphorical, representing financial ruin as bodily imprisonment. Others? They're pretty convinced it was literal rope. When I awoke, I was at sea. They'd sold him, their brother. to a merchant ship bound for an island far from anything resembling kindness. The old man shrugs. Like you do when someone spills soup on your favorite rug and apologizes too late. It took me 2 years to return. You blink? 2 years? Just like that? No montage? Apparently, yes. He escaped through what he calls a disagreement between pirates, and you're too polite to ask for details. When I arrived home, he continues, my house was gone. My brothers had declared me dead and taken everything, even the dogs. You glance at the cage. The hounds stir. They had taken my beloved pets, he says, voice quiet now. The 2 creatures I trusted most, and abandoned them. You frown. That feels personal and strangely precise. And so I wandered, until I came across a woman, he says, a hint of reverence in his tone. Living alone, among broken statues and whispering trees. Ah, here comes the magic again. She asked me one question, he says. Do you still wish to love your brothers? You know that feeling you get when someone's about to say something that'll change your whole understanding of the situation? Yeah, that. I said no, he whispers, and the dogs in the cage look up at him, eyes wide and wet and knowing. They are my brothers, he says. Cue the horror. They live as hounds, fed, sheltered, cared for, but bound by their own betrayal. That fringe detail again, in lesser-known versions of this tale told in Yemen. The dogs cry at certain moon phases, not howling, crying. It's creepy. No one explains it. I was told, he adds, that only the forgiveness of a stranger could break the spell. A stranger or a demon. He locks eyes with the horned figure. So here I stand, offering this tale of sorrow. If it moves you, even slightly, grant me another third of this merchant's life. You look back to the demon. He tilts his head, sniffs the air, stares at the dogs, and then, in a voice like wind slipping under doors, says, Fine. 2/3 now. The merchant sags, nearly toppling sideways from relief. You're halfway between hopeful and horrified, because clearly, this isn't over from the horizon. There's a flicker, the faint glint of brass or gold under the sun, and the demon, now openly smirking, says, Well then, let's see if anyone else has a story worth a life. You glance toward the horizon where the shimmer glowed moments ago, expecting, perhaps, a caravan, or another old man with even more dramatic flair. What you do not expect is what actually steps into view. The third old man is, well, not what you'd call standard issue. He's hunched, yes, and robed in layers dyed with ochre and emerald. But over his shoulder, he carries a small, lacquered box bound in iron clasps. Under one arm, a rooster? A rooster, of all things, with feathers that shimmer like molten copper, and a face that's frankly giving you major, I've seen things energy. As he trudges forward, the demon lets out a long, gusty sigh. Let me guess, the demon says, twirling one claw. You've got a tragic tale and a cursed something in that ridiculous box. The man stops and grins, teeth white as almonds. Cursed? Certainly not, he says. Tragic? Depending on how fond you are of pet birds. The merchant wheezes, half sitting, half collapsing in the sand. Eyes wide, he's clearly not confident this next tale will buy him what remains of his life. But, really, what choice does he have? The third old man nods once, then drops to sit cross-legged on the sand. He sets the box before him. The rooster hops down with a self-important cluck and begins pecking around as if none of this concerns him. I was once, he begins. A man of study, a collector of things obscure and improbable, cursed dice, prophetic teeth, scrolls no one could read but everyone feared anyway. You raise an eyebrow. Sounds like your typical antique dealer with a cursed object addiction. One day, he says, I came across a man selling a bird cage wrapped in veils. The thing shimmered like moonlight in a fog. He said the creature inside could sing the future. Pause. Sing the future. And here's your historical fact. In many parts of medieval Persia, birds, especially parrots and crows, were believed to have prophetic abilities. There are even travelogues from 12th century Cairo describing birds trained to pick fortune cards. So, not entirely outlandish. I bought it, the man says simply. Because of course I did. But the bird wasn't a songbird. It was this rooster, the same glowering, iridescent beast now pecking suspiciously near your shoe. He didn't sing, the man continues. He spoke in riddles, half proverbs, half warnings. The demon squints at the bird. The rooster glares back, unblinking. It's unsettling. For a time, I thought it was a scam. But then, one night, he told me to leave my home. Just that. Leave now. Walk backward. Do not look up. He leans closer, voice dropping. I obeyed. And as I reached the alley, a tremor struck. My entire study collapsed behind me, walls folding like parchment. 1,000 artifacts smashed to dust. You nod slowly. Okay. Creepy bird suddenly sounds like a good roommate. I stayed with him after that. The old man admits. Tried to understand what he was. Tried to translate his mutterings. That's your scholarly debate. Some versions of this story suggest the rooster was once a jinn scholar, imprisoned in feathered form by a rival. Others say it was a cursed prince, doomed to speak only in half-truths. No one agrees. Everyone's confused. The rooster remains smug. One day, he continues, the rooster began repeating a name. A woman's name I didn't recognize. Over and over, day and night. He shrugs. So I went looking for her. Sure, logical step. She lived alone, on the edge of the red waste. When I knocked, she opened the door and said, It's about time you arrived. I need help hiding a god. Silence. Even the demon blinks at that one. You almost laugh, almost, because it's too absurd. But the man is deadly serious. She wasn't mad, not quite. She believed a fragment of a divine being had attached itself to her, hidden in her bones. She needed someone who could shield her from beings that hunt such things. You mutter, Why is it never just taxes? The man continues. I stayed with her for 13 days. Each night, the rooster grew more agitated. Each morning, the shadows in the corners grew thicker, until the 14th day, when something knocked. Not someone, something. He taps the box in front of him. I trapped it, he says. Whatever it was, the demon scoffs. That tiny box? Dimensions are flexible when you speak the right tongue, the man says smoothly. You'd be rolling your eyes. But part of you, some irrational, sleep-deprived part, believes him. I kept the box with me ever since. It murmurs sometimes. And if you open it, the air smells like burning roses. That's your fringe detail. In a rare Ottoman variant of this tale, the box actually changes shape depending on who looks at it. Some see a jewel, others a cage. The bird, always the same. I asked the rooster if the being was evil. He says. He said, only if ignored. And then never spoke again. That was 10 years ago. He leans back. I've wandered since then. Guarding this box, feeding this bird, waiting, perhaps, for someone who might know what it all meant. The demon drums his claws on his knee. That was barely a story, he says. More like a fever dream told by a hoarder. but there's a curl of amusement in his voice. And you notice something. The air has shifted again. The same subtle thinning that came with the other tales. The demon exhales. Fine. You three, your lives will preserve his. He points at the merchant. But should he ever forget your mercy? Should he break bread and fail to mention your names? I'll find him again. The merchant nods, trembling, probably planning to tattoo all their names onto his arm. The demon stands, stretches like a cat, and with a motion so smooth it makes your brain glitch. He vanishes, not explodes, not fades, just isn't anymore. And you are left in silence, surrounded by 3 old men, 1 nervous merchant, and a deeply unsettling bird. No one speaks for a while. The first man dusts off his robe. Well, that was a bit much. The second feeds his dogs a dried fig. The third reclasps the box, muttering to the rooster. Stop glaring. He was bound to insult you. And you? You sit there, watching the sun climb higher into the coppery sky, thinking about forgiveness, magic, and the strange math of mercy. You survived, probably. But just because you survived doesn't mean the story ends there. You find yourself back at the caravanserai by late afternoon, the heat turning everything into waves. You're still trying to understand what just happened. Your brain stuck in a loop. Demon, deer, rooster, exploding palaces. The merchant thanks each of the old men with a trembling bow before vanishing into a dust cloud of camels and baggage. And the 3 old men? They vanish in opposite directions without another word. Classic. You stretch, bones cracking, and look around. You could go back inside, pretend none of this ever happened. You could sleep for a week. But something itches at your skull, like a whisper stuck behind your ear. You need to know more, not just about these men or that demon, but about the tales themselves, the structure behind the chaos. Because now you realize you're in one, and it's still happening. So you follow the scent of fresh dates and old parchment into the shaded corner of the courtyard, where a young woman lounges on a rug embroidered with stars. She's flipping through a thick, leather-bound codex, fingers tracing the gold leaf letters like they're memories, and beside her, a stack of scrolls, old and cracked. She looks up. You heard them, didn't you? Her voice is soft, but carries that oddly formal tone historians always have, like she's trying to preserve each word in amber. You blink. Heard who? She smiles. The kind of smile people wear when they know you're lying. They call them the witnessed. People who've heard all 3 stories and lived. You shift uneasily. That's a thing? It's rare, she says. But yes, and since you're one of them, you should know something. She reaches into her satchel and pulls out a weathered piece of parchment. There's a 4th. You freeze. Wait, what? She unrolls the parchment and you see it's not a map, but a letter. The script is winding, precise, but you recognize one word repeated over and over. Dear. Your pulse ticks up. She leans closer. Not every story makes it into the collection. She murmurs. But some slip through. Quiet ones, forgotten by the scribes, remembered only by the people who lived them. She taps the parchment. The first old man had a dear wife. The second had a dear brother. The third, he never said what happened to the rooster's original form. You blink. Wait, are you saying there's a 4th man? Or another creature? She shrugs, but her eyes sparkle with dangerous curiosity. Historians still argue whether the 4th deer ever existed. She says. Some say it was an illusion cast by the demon. Others believe it's the one true story. All the rest are echoes. She stands and starts walking. You follow because, well, you'd be lying if you said you weren't deeply, unreasonably curious, and also maybe a little enchanted. You're allowed. As you walk, She starts telling a story, not from a scroll, not from a book, but from memory. "There was once a kingdom," she begins, "where deer outnumbered men, not because the land was wild, but because the people were cursed." You shiver. They say the curse began with a prince, a cruel boy who turned his sister into a stag for daring to outwit him in public. But the spell backfired. The next morning, he was a doe. And every day after, someone else would transform, until there were only a handful of humans left, trying desperately not to offend the wrong tree, or speak in rhyme, or sleep under moonlight. You pause. "This sounds oddly plausible." She nods. Magic was fickle then. And it said that the last surviving human was a girl who never spoke, never angered anyone. She wandered the woods for years until she met a creature wearing a man's voice like a jacket. Oh, hello, unsettling metaphor. "She didn't run," the woman continues. "She sat, she waited, and finally, the creature said, 'If you name me, I vanish. If you serve me, I grow. If you love me, I die.'" You say, "That's the riddle of the Jinn heart." She nods again. "Exactly. But she didn't answer. Why not? Because she'd already solved it. She just didn't want the story to end. And there it is, the spine of this whole strange journey. The idea that sometimes stories need to keep spinning. That if you answer the riddle, slay the beast, marry the prince, or open the box, things stop. And the stop is the scariest part. So she leaves the riddle unanswered, walks away, and the curse, it lingers. There's your quirky tidbit. In some Bedouin oral retellings, the curse of the deer isn't punishment, but preservation. A way to keep beauty alive. Antlers like golden branches, hooves soft as whispers. People turned into memory. You stop in your tracks, suddenly aware of how far you've walked. The walls of the city are nowhere in sight. The sun is setting, casting the sky in stripes of violet and brass. You look to your companion, but she's gone. Not vanished, just not there anymore. You're alone, with a story that might not exist, and a riddle no one is willing to answer. You turn slowly, and for the first time, the world around you feels thinner, less real. The sand whispers secrets between your toes. The air holds more stories than sound. A faint clucking echoes in the distance. You smile. Somewhere, the rooster still watches. You're starting to notice a pattern. Every time you think the story's over, boom, it curls inward like smoke, taking you deeper. You're walking through memory now, through something older than cities, older than coins, older than language itself. The sands underfoot feel warm. Yes, but it's a warmth of remembrance, as though each grain is storing the echo of a tale long since spoken aloud. So, when the stranger approaches you at dusk, hooded, silent, barely disturbing the air, you don't flinch. He stops a few steps away, nods, and gestures toward a tent you definitely didn't see before. One with orange velvet panels and dangling brass charms that tinkle like nervous laughter. You duck inside, and the smell hits you first. Dried rose petals, burnt clove, something like old parchment steeped in tea. Inside sits a single figure, bent nearly double over a scroll. No face, no name. Just a voice that starts mid-sentence. And of course, no one believes the fourth tale was ever meant to be written down. They look up. Two sharp eyes, like ink droplets in a saucer of milk. "Still, you're here," you murmur. "I don't even know where here is." "Oh, but you do," the figure says. "You've entered the pause between tales, the breath, the intermission, the space where forgotten stories sleep. You feel it now." This tent isn't just a tent, it's a library, a secret one. You start to see them. Scrolls tucked into candle-lit shelves, stories written on silk, even a curved horn hanging on the back wall with spirals etched along its surface. You're pretty sure it's whispering. The figure waves you forward and unrolls a scroll that bears no title. It said this version predates the others. They begin. Not a tale about a man with a dear wife or a rooster with sass, but a woman who turned herself into a deer to escape the eyes of men. You lean closer. She wasn't enchanted, not cursed. She chose it, because being a deer meant being left alone. Now that it's different. She lived at the edge of a dry riverbed, the kind that only filled once every 7 years. Her days were quiet, foraging, napping under junipers, watching the moon pull shapes across the sand. But one year, when the river flowed red with minerals from the mountains, a man saw her drinking, and of course, because men in stories can't help themselves, he followed. He didn't want to hurt her. He told himself, just look closer. Maybe name her. Maybe understand. But he stepped too close, made a noise, startled her. She ran, but the river kept flooding, and soon the valley filled. She had nowhere left to run. So she did something no deer ever had. She turned back. She stood, cracked her hooves into fingers, lifted her head high, and spoke. You always chase, she said, but you never ask why we run. The man blinked, stunned, not by her voice, but by the accusation. He fell to his knees, ashamed. Then something stranger happened. He turned into a deer. 2. The scroll ends there. No moral, no wrap-up. Just 2 deer standing in a valley that hasn't seen rain since. You sit back, stunned. That's not in any manuscript. You whisper. The figure nods. Exactly. Here's your historical fact. In many pre-Islamic oral traditions across Mesopotamia, animals weren't merely symbols. They were fluid forms. Becoming a deer, a falcon, or even a locust wasn't punishment or metaphor. It was an option, a choice. Whole poems were recited around campfires where the hero shapeshifts to escape an unwanted marriage or to spy on rivals. Some of the earliest Arabian myths suggest that turning into another being was seen as a mark of wisdom, not shame. The figure tucks away the scroll and pours you a cup of something warm and spicy, maybe cinnamon, maybe mystery. They sigh. Historians still argue whether this scroll was ever part of Scheherazade's original collection. They murmur. Some say she told it to herself, alone, in the dark hours before dawn. And suddenly, that name slices through the atmosphere. Scheherazade. She's been behind this the whole time, hasn't she? You've walked her stories, danced in her riddles, drunk from her metaphors, and only now, do you realize you're inside her pause, her breath, the silence she mastered like a weapon? You want to ask a dozen questions, but the figure stops you with a raised hand. She told tales to stay alive. You, however, they smile cryptically. You're here because you listened. There's a long pause. You sip the tea. It hums behind your teeth. Then the tent begins to fade. Slowly. Fabric into mist. Shelves into shadows. The figure leans in and whispers, "You've earned the right to hear the next part, but only if you remember this. Not every story ends. Some simply wait. You're back outside, standing alone in the soft night, stars above like scattered almonds on velvet. The air is cooler now, threaded with jasmine and, oddly, cardamom. Something brushes past your ankle. You look down. A deer, not running, not speaking, just standing there, watching. And for once, you don't chase it. You sit beside it instead. You sit still, shoulder to fur, as the deer settles beside you like a house cat made of smoke and grace. It doesn't speak, because of course it doesn't. Not every magical creature is contractually obligated to talk in riddles. Some just are. And right now, that's enough. For a long while, there's only the sound of your breathing and the soft scrape of hooves against packed earth as the deer shifts slightly, exhaling like a sigh you once forgot to take. You let your hand hover just above its back, not touching, just feeling the nearness. It smells like crushed pine in the moonlight. You don't know how long you sit like that. Time, another victim of these stories, has gone pleasantly missing. Eventually, the deer rises. It doesn't run, doesn't even look back. It just walks away, vanishing behind a crooked dune as if being written out of a sentence. And you, now heavy with a strange peace, begin walking in the opposite direction, letting instinct guide you. By dawn, you reach what looks like a ruin, but smells like a bakery. You blink. The building is mostly collapsed. One remaining archway leans like a tired eyebrow, and tufts of mint grow stubbornly through the cracks in the flagstones. But there, inside the last standing wall, is a clay oven still warm from use. And sitting beside it, a man with one arm, one boot, and the unmistakable look of someone who has definitely spoken to a genie before breakfast. He squints up at you. You look like you've walked through 7 tales and 2 metaphors. You raise an eyebrow? Maybe. Good, he says. You're ready. He gestures to the oven and pulls out a round of flatbread the size of a small galaxy. Steam coils upward. It smells like cumin, garlic, and something ancient. He tears it in half and hands you a piece. You accept without a word, because let's be real, at this point, resisting hospitality is just rude. As you chew, he begins. You've heard of the 3 old men, maybe even glimpsed the 4th. But have you ever wondered why so many stories begin with animals turning into people, or people becoming animals? You nod, mouth full of myth. Well, he says, licking hummus off his thumb. It goes back to a time when the boundaries between species weren't so uptight, before the courts and clerics started putting rules on magic. Back then, a good apology had to involve at least one transformation. You pause. Wait, apology? He laughs, a sound like pebbles skittering down a roof. Absolutely. You wrong someone? You owe them a symbolic journey. You turn into a dog for a week, or a camel, sometimes a lizard if it's a minor offense. You chew thoughtfully. So, the first old man's dear wife? Exactly, he says. In some versions, she turned herself into a deer because she'd insulted her husband's poetry. In others, he made her a deer because she laughed when he fell off a donkey. Honestly, who can blame her? He winks. Anyway, that's your quirky tidbit for today. Shape-shifting as apology, not a punishment, not a curse, just really elaborate guilt. You consider this, then ask, and the demon? His eyes darken. Just for a moment. The demon is the deadline, the price of silence, the thing that shows up when a story stagnates, a pause. The wind slips through a broken window frame. Historians still argue, he continues, whether the demon in the first old man and the deer was ever real, or if it was a narrative device, a way for Scheherazade to move the plot, to make sure no one fell asleep before the punchline. Another bite of bread. Another thought forming. What happened to the merchant? The man shrugs. Some say he became a scribe. Others think he was the demon all along, testing mortals with fake trades and real consequences. Me? I think he moved to a coastal town and took up fishing. Fewer genies involved. You laugh, surprised at the brightness of it. The sun is rising behind him now, casting the ruins in soft gold. You can almost pretend you're somewhere ordinary. Almost. The man stands and brushes the crumbs off his knees. Come on. There's something you need to see. You follow him around the bend, past a collapsed minaret and a cracked mosaic of a lion eating a peach. Weirdly specific. You love it. And there, behind a wall overtaken by vines, is a door. It's not attached to anything. Just a freestanding wooden door frame. Old brass handle. Slightly ajar. You glance at him. What's this? He grins. You'll never believe it. But this leads straight to the storyteller's garden. Scheherazade's? He nods. Some say her soul still wanders there, tending the flowers of unfinished tales. You approach the door, hand hovering over the knob. It hums under your palm. Go on, he says. You've earned the next story. So you open it and step into a night that smells like orange blossoms and ink. The garden is vast and quiet, lit by lanterns that float like sleepy fireflies. Vines curl up marble columns. Fountains gurgle softly, and scattered across the grass like stars. Scrolls. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Maybe. In the center sits a woman, hair braided like the Milky Way, fingers stained with saffron and ash. She doesn't look up, but she says, without turning, "You're late." You gulp. "Sorry." She pats the ground beside her. "No matter. Come, sit. There's a story I haven't finished, and I think you're the one who's supposed to hear it." You sit, and she begins. You settle in beside her, knees brushing the cool marble as she unrolls a scroll on the grass. The ink gleams in the lantern light, still wet, still writing itself as she speaks. Her voice is soft, layered with honey and smoke. And when she tells the story, it doesn't feel like fiction. It feels like you're falling into something warm, deep, and vaguely illegal in most modern time zones. The story begins, she murmurs, as so many do, with a terrible mistake. You blink, already lost. There was once a young scribe who worked in the palace archives, not for gold or glory, but because he liked the smell of old parchment and the silence between sentences. He lived a quiet life, one foot always in legend, and the other in reality. And that, of course, is where things started to unravel. You feel the story taking shape around you, like smoke from a long extinguished fire. The garden becomes the scribe's library. The rustling trees become the sound of turning pages. You can even smell the dust of long-forgotten manuscripts. And for some reason, cinnamon. This scribe, she continues, was the great-great-grandson of the merchant who met the demon in the desert. But he didn't know that. Not yet. Ah, the merchant again. You lean forward slightly, already anticipating the callback. One day, she says. The scribe found a sealed jar tucked behind a loose stone in the archives. Not the usual sort of jar you'd find in a dusty corner of bureaucracy. This one hummed. Of course it did. It sang in a forgotten dialect. It sweated salt water even though the palace was nowhere near the sea. He opened it. You wince, because obviously he opened it. Yep. Inside the jar was no genie. No puff of blue smoke. Just a folded piece of silk, embroidered with a single line of calligraphy. One debt unpaid is one story undone. You murmur that to yourself. Now, this was no ordinary curse. She says, it was hereditary, a story left untold, passed down through generations like a phantom limb. The scribe began dreaming. Then, of deserts and demons, of deer that spoke in riddles, and of his ancestor, the merchant who had promised things he could not deliver. The story of the first old man wasn't done. Not really. Something was missing, and if it wasn't told in full, the curse would bloom. You interrupt her gently. So, the merchant survived the demon? She looks at you sideways. Survived? Maybe. But surviving isn't always the same as escaping. Historians still argue whether the demon actually let him go, or whether it just changed shape, embedding itself in the bones of his family line. Oh! You lie back on the grass, staring at the floating lanterns overhead. So the scribe is trying to finish the story. Yes, she says. But here's the tricky bit. He doesn't know how it ends, because the deer, the wife, never got to tell her side, and until someone speaks her truth, the tale stays fractured. You blink. The deer gets a voice. She always did, she says, almost annoyed. You just weren't listening yet. You pause, letting that settle in your chest like a weight you didn't know you carried. And that's when she hands you the scroll. I think it's yours now, she says. Not to write, just to hold. It'll finish itself once it hears enough. The scroll is warm. The ink on it shifts like tidewater. Words rewrite themselves as you watch. It's unsettling. Kind of like watching someone edit a social media post in real time, but medieval and probably enchanted. You look up to ask a question, but she's already standing. She brushes off her robes and points to a path that wasn't there before. Cobblestone, glinting under a lantern held aloft by a disinterested-looking owl. Follow the bird, she says. And don't eat anything that asks you a question first. Solid advice. You walk. The owl doesn't fly so much as float, leading you through hedges shaped like mythical beasts. There's a griffin sipping tea, a sphinx mid-eye roll, and something that might be a unicorn, but could also be a goat with ambition. As you round a curve, you find a small pond. Not grand, not magical, just a pond. Sitting beside it is a second old man. No deer in sight. He's carving something out of bone, not ominous at all. He doesn't look up, just gestures to the stone beside him. You sit. He speaks without preamble. You want to know what happened after the deer ran? You nod. She didn't run, he says. She walked, slow and deliberate, because she wanted to be seen. Interesting twist. She went into the mountains, found a place where nothing could smell her. No predator, no curse, no broken-hearted husband. And there, she learned magic. Not the flashy kind, not potions or lightning, but the old kind, story magic. You're hooked again, fully immersed. She could weave silence into memory, could bind regret into a lullaby. Her hooves left trails that confused maps. He taps the scroll in your hand. That's her magic in there, waiting to be reread. You blink, uncertain. So the first old man never found her? He smiles sadly. He found her. But by then, she had already changed, and so had he. They passed each other once on a hill path. Didn't speak, didn't need to. A beat. She forgave him, though that's the real end. Not in vengeance, not in punishment, but in letting go. You sit with that. It's heavier than it sounds. The owl coughs behind you. Yes, coughs. Like it's trying to remind you that this story still has places to be. You stand. The second old man raises an eyebrow. You're not going to ask what I did to deserve being a story. You shrug. Should I? He laughs. Smart. Curiosity is expensive here. He goes back to carving. You leave him by the pond and follow the owl deeper into the garden. The path narrows. The lanterns are dimmer. You sense another section waiting just around the bend. Another old man. Another piece of truth waiting to slip its way into the scroll that hasn't stopped humming in your hands. You grip it tighter and walk on. You keep your pace steady. Footsteps soft on the shifting cobblestone path. The garden around you murmurs in a dozen dialects, wind sighing through reeds, crickets playing syncopated rhythms, and water somewhere in the distance trickling over ancient stone. The owl hovers just ahead, nonchalant, occasionally glancing back like a tour guide bored of their own route. The path forks suddenly. Of course it does. One path winds upward toward a tower cradled by climbing roses and quiet moonlight. The other descends toward shadow, a thicket gnarled with brambles, where lanterns hang upside down and light spills upward instead of down. The owl takes the shadowed path. Sigh. You follow? The air gets cooler here. Not cold, just the kind of chill that hints at secrets. The trees lean in, the leaves rustle as though whispering gossip you're not quite privy to. And then, through a low arch of ivy, you emerge into a clearing. There he is, the third old man, except he's not what you expected. He's lounging in a broken armchair upholstered with what looks suspiciously like lion fur, sipping something steamy from a porcelain cup patterned with fish. He's got one sandal off, a string of garlic around his neck, and a parrot on his shoulder who appears to be reciting tax codes in Farsi. The man waves lazily. You're late. You frown. You didn't give me a time. Exactly, he says, and winks. You're not sure if he's brilliant or just deeply confused. Possibly both. You sit. The third old man sips from his cup again, then leans forward and, like the others, starts his story without permission or preface. I once had 2 brothers, he says, and like most brothers, they were terrible. Classic sibling energy. They stole from me, lied to me. One of them even tried to marry a demon in disguise because he thought she was mysterious and good with riddles. I mean, who falls for that? You raise a hand awkwardly. He waves it off. You're not the first. Won't be the last. He continues. We had inherited a caravanserai. Dusty place. Smelled like camels and regret. My brothers gambled it away. Every tile, every beam of cedar. I came back from the spice market one day, and boom, sold to a passing sorceress with a coupon. He leans back, sighs. So I cursed them. Wait, what? Nothing deadly, he says quickly. Just poetic. One became a camel with hiccups. The other turned into a teapot that only brews anxiety. You blink. That feels extreme. He shrugs. You try living with them for 30 years and see how you handle it. You have to admit, fair point. So what happened? You ask. I wandered, he says. Tried to find forgiveness, or wisdom, or at least a good barber. Ended up here. Told my story to a demon by a fig tree. He liked it so much. He gave me a pass. You raise an eyebrow. A pass? The old man taps a medallion hanging from his garlic necklace. It glows faintly. Exemption, he says. Once per year, I can enter the demon's garden, sit beneath the story tree, and be spared. But only if I tell a tale that matters. You study him. So, your life's been reduced to one good story a year? He smiles slowly. Isn't everyone's? Touché. Behind you. The parrot sneezes. You pause for a moment, letting the question sink in. Are we all just crafting one worthy story at a time, hoping some ancient judge will nod and say, all right, you may pass? The old man watches you watching him. Then he gestures toward the scroll in your hands. That thing humming yet? You nod. Good, that means you're close. He sets down his cup and reaches beneath the armchair, pulls out a small wooden box. He opens it carefully. Inside is a deer hoof, cleaned, polished, wrapped in violet silk. You go still. It's hers, he says quietly. From the woman in the first story. You blink. I thought she ran. She did, but not without a trace. That deer left pieces of herself behind, tokens, talismans, truths no one wanted to face. He places the box in your hands. It's not morbid, he adds. It's a memory, the shape of survival. The hoof is lighter than it looks, warm, somehow. Not like flesh, like the echo of someone's final sentence before they turned and left forever. He watches you. There's an argument, he says slowly, that the deer wasn't a victim at all, that she chose her fate. You tilt your head, but she was cursed. And yet, he counters, she endured, transformed, survived. How many cursed women got to do that in ancient stories? You sit with that. Historians still argue, he adds with a sly grin, whether the deer's transformation was punishment or liberation. The scroll in your hand ripples. Literally, the ink reforms. A new line appears, clear as breath in frost. She ran. Yes, but not away. You suck in a slow breath. Behind you, the owl hoots. The old man stands. Time's up. But I have more questions. Then keep walking, he says. You do. As you rise, the parrot clears its throat and says, all unpaid debts will be converted into dreams. Cool. Comforting. You follow the path again. Past thorny hedges that whisper. Past statues that seem to change position when you blink. The owl circles overhead like a lazy halo. And the scroll? It's getting heavier. Not in weight, in significance. You pass an arch that looks vaguely familiar. The air smells like cardamom and secrets. And you realize you've nearly looped back. 3 old men, 3 stories. But one question remains unanswered. What about the demon? The original one? The one who started this whole mess with a scimitar and a grudge? Because you still don't know if he was tricked, or changed, or waiting. And worse, you're beginning to suspect you're not just hearing the story. You're in it. The owl dives forward with purpose now. No more lazy loops or lazy glances. You pick up your pace. The garden isn't just a garden anymore. It feels alive, alert, like the hedges are listening and the stones underfoot are remembering each step. You glance down. The scroll in your hand glows gently, as if it's guiding you now instead of the other way around. You pass under a trellis twisted with grapevines, their fruit black and bursting. One falls as you pass. It hits the ground silently, then melts into ink. You're not surprised. The air thickens, sweeter, like old paper, cinnamon, and something floral you can't name. You're close to something. Not the end, but a turning. Ahead, a gate waits. Not grand, not iron, just 2 tall wooden doors set in a whitewashed wall, carved with spirals, lions, and 1,000 tiny eyes. You blink. Some of them blink back. The owl lands on the lintel. This is where you don't go back, it says, then fluffs its feathers, tucks its head beneath one wing, and promptly falls asleep. Typical. You push the doors open. Inside, silence. But not the dead kind. It's a waiting silence. Patient. Like an empty amphitheater just before the curtain rises. You step into a circular courtyard. No roof. The stars above form a dome of cracked glass, and the moon is directly overhead, blinding and benevolent, like a mother pretending not to be angry. At the center of the courtyard stands a figure, tall, cloaked, hood drawn. You approach slowly. The figure doesn't move. Then it speaks. Low, steady, quiet enough that you're not sure if you're hearing or remembering. You've come to ask about justice. You blink. I came to hear stories. It tilts its head. Same thing. Fair. The figure lowers the hood. You almost expect fire, horns, a forked tongue. But it's just a face. Ordinary. Tired. Human. Almost not kind. But not cruel either. The kind of face you'd pass on a city street and forget 5 seconds later. Except here, that's somehow worse. I am the demon, they say plainly. Or was, or might be. It depends on how the story ends. Your grip tightens on the scroll. You killed the merchant. I did, they say. Once. You frown. Then you are the villain. They look at you carefully. You say that like the story ended there. You take a breath. Didn't it? They step aside, where they were standing. The ground glows with a sigil, concentric circles, an eye in the middle, and 3 foxes curled around the edges. The center burns slightly when you look at it. This, they say, is the seal of narrative debt. You squint. Is that an actual thing? They nod. A very old one, older than you, older than me, a pact. When blood is spilled unjustly in a story, the tale stays open. The teller doesn't choose. The debt demands a shape. You blink. So, because you killed the merchant without cause, the world cracked open and dragged me into it. You step back slightly. So you were punished? The demon shrugs. I became the thing I feared. The judge. The test. The hinge. You glance at the seal. And the others? The old men? The stories? All part of the balance. The demon says. Each tale is a weighing of guilt. Mercy against wrath. Transformation against cruelty. And if they tell it well, you ask, they're spared. Not always, the demon replies. Sometimes they tell it so well. They become it. You don't like that. Not even a little. Historians still argue. The demon adds wryly. Whether the real villain of the 1001 Nights is the king, the djinn, or the story itself. You step closer. Why did you kill the merchant? They meet your eyes. Because he stepped on a vine. You tilt your head. The demon continues. He threw a date pit. It landed beside a root. The root belonged to a sapling I had protected for 100 years. One careless pit. One tree undone. You blink. That's it? The demon's voice goes quiet. Sometimes the smallest acts destroy the longest care. You consider that. It's not rage you feel from them. It's grief. Quiet, sticky, ancient grief that clings to the underside of words and never quite leaves. But still, you say softly, he didn't know. Does it matter? They ask. You don't answer. Instead, you look down at the scroll. The ink has swirled again. A new line. Injustice isn't always loud. You exhale. Why me? You ask. The demon nods towards the scroll. Because you're listening. Listening to what? They reach out, one fingertip to your temple. A whisper, a memory not your own. You see the merchant, laughing. You see the tree, wilting. You see the demon weeping beneath the soil. When the vision fades, you're crying. Quietly. You don't remember when you started. You wipe your face. So what now? The demon sighs. Now, you decide what story this is. You raise an eyebrow. Me? You carry the scroll, they say. That makes you the narrator. For now, you step back into the center of the courtyard. The owl flutters down beside you, eyes half closed. The scroll vibrates gently in your hand. You're not done, the demon says. There's more, always more. You look back once. The demon is already fading, like smoke or memory. You turn, ahead, another door. Because of course there is. As you walk, the stars above shift. Constellations realign. One now looks suspiciously like a cat chasing a kebab skewer. And even though your feet are sore and your brain feels like overcooked lentils, you smile. Because somehow, against all logic, you're beginning to love this. This weird, winding, wakeful world of stories. But also, you know something now that you didn't before. The stories are watching you, too. You step through the next door, and the scent of spice slaps you in the face like a playful sibling. It's not unpleasant, just startling. Cinnamon, cardamom, roasted almond, and something smoky that might be cumin or just the smell of someone's burnt hopes. You're not sure anymore where metaphor ends and dinner begins. You're in a market, but not your average sunlit bazaar. This one operates under permanent twilight, like it's stuck just after sunset, with long shadows and flickering lanterns that never burn out. The stalls lean in on each other like gossiping old men, and everything's too close, too loud, too alive. And you? You're now following the first old man, though you're not sure when he appeared. Maybe he's been ahead of you the whole time, just hidden behind plot twists and poetic justice. He walks with that stiff, regal gait of someone who once owned a palace and now owns stories instead. His staff taps the stones with a rhythm that doesn't quite match your own pace, as if he's keeping time to an entirely different tale. Beside him trots the deer. Yes, that deer. She moves elegantly, like she's used to being watched, which makes sense. She's been part of this story for centuries, both captive and character. You trail behind them, your scroll humming slightly, as if it recognizes the beat of the old man's footsteps. So, he says without turning. You want to know what happened? Not a question. Not really. You nod. I heard the basics. The merchant, the djinn, your petition. He chuckles. Dry and raspy. Ah, yes. The abridged version, quick, clean, lacking the emotional carnage. The deer flicks her tail. You quicken your pace, matching his stride. So what's the full version? He finally looks at you. His eyes are lined with fatigue, but they hold that twinkle, like he knows something you don't, and is savoring the delay. You want the truth? He asks. Isn't that the point? He chuckles again. Funny thing, that word, truth? Historians still argue whether any of us ever told it. Of course they do. He stops in front of a spice stall. The vendor is asleep, snoring into a pile of saffron. The old man picks up a pinch of sumac, inhales deeply, then lets it fall like crimson snow. She wasn't always a deer, he says softly. She was my wife, my equal, my match in wit, wisdom, and cruelty. You raise an eyebrow. Cruelty? He nods. We were rulers, once, not just of a kingdom, of a whole way of life. We believed in balance, light and dark, joy and discipline, mercy and revenge. But over time, he trails off. What happened? You prompt. She grew jealous, he says, eyes on the swirling spice. Not of other women, but of my son. You blink. Your son? He nods. From another union, a boy with laughter in his bones. He reminded me of sunshine, and she hated that. He looks at you again. Some hearts shrink when they see joy in others. That lands heavier than you expect. She turned him into a calf, he says. A sweet, dumb creature. I didn't recognize him at first, just thought it was a gift from a neighboring tribe. You frown, but then he closes his eyes. Then I heard it hum, a tune only I knew, a lullaby I had sung to him once, when he was sick with fever. You swallow hard. I wept, he continues, and she watched. No guilt, no fear, just quiet satisfaction. The deer looks away now, her ears twitching. What did you do? You ask. The old man taps his staff once. Hard. I called on a sorceress, he says. An old friend, possibly an enemy. The lines blur in magic. You nod slowly. She reversed the spell, he says, but added one of her own. My wife would become what she had made, not out of spite, but symmetry. He He glances at the deer. She's been silent ever since. Not mute, just quiet. You can feel the tension between them, like something old and unfinished. Why keep her? You ask gently. He sighs. Because forgiveness isn't always release, and sometimes penance takes the shape of loyalty. That's a lot. The scroll stirs in your hand again. A new line. Justice is rarely symmetrical. Forgiveness never is. You walk in silence for a while. The market shifts around you. Lanterns flicker. A boy sells pickled plums shaped like moons. Somewhere, a goat wearing sunglasses steals a date. You let the image sit a while before speaking again. But why plead for the merchant, you ask? What made you intervene? The old man's voice is soft. Because I saw myself in him. Careless, cursed, condemned. And I knew what it was to be trapped by something you never meant. The deer nudges his hand. He looks down, smiles faintly, rubs her ear. She taught me, he says. That silence can be louder than guilt. You nod. A pause. So, you say, did the djinn accept your tale because of the emotion or the plot structure? He chuckles. Who's to say? Maybe he liked talking animals. You grin. Same. The owl glides overhead, now wearing a tiny vest for no apparent reason. Where do we go next? You ask. The old man points down an alley, dark and narrow, lit only by the shimmer of the moon reflecting off brass. Follow the scent of betrayal, he says. It usually leads to the second story. You turn toward the alley. Behind you, the market exhales. Ahead, the air sharpens again. The deer stays behind. You glance back. She watches. Silent. But there's something in her gaze. Not regret. Not apology. Just history. You walk on. The old man fades behind you, and the scroll grows warmer in your hand. The alley swallows you, narrow and winding, like a vein carrying blood toward some unseen heart. The walls press in, built from uneven stone and old, forgotten intentions. There's a faint glow coming from moss. Yes, glowing moss that pulses in time with your steps. Every so often, a shadow darts just out of sight. Probably a rat. Possibly a minor deity. You don't really want to know. The scroll hums again in your hand, guiding you. Its parchment is warm, whispering something beneath your skin. Not in words, but in mood. The next story isn't waiting. It's lurking. You stumble out of the alley and into a courtyard so quiet it feels like a dream that's trying to remember itself. A fountain burbles in the center, though instead of water, it flows with ink, thick, black, and oddly fragrant. Surrounding it are 3 archways, each marked with a symbol, a fish, a sword, and a chain. You don't even get to pick. A voice rises from the shadows. Calm, polished, slightly condescending in the way only nobility and cats manage. I see the first old man softened you up. You turn, and there stands the second old man. He's tall, impossibly so, built like a chandelier made human. His robe is heavy with embroidery and small metal bells that should jingle but don't. Not even when he moves. The silence around him seems deliberate, like it's part of his wardrobe. He carries a box. It's locked, and from inside it comes a soft thud. Then another. Something alive is in there. You don't ask. Not yet. He gestures for you to sit by the fountain. You do, trying not to dip a toe in the ink stream. You're pretty sure it stains realities. My story, he begins, is less poetic than the last. Fewer deer, more drama. Of course, he sits, box on his lap. She was my brother's daughter, he says. Your eyebrows shoot up. We were both of age. The match was arranged. And yes, before you bristle, such marriages were common. still are in some places. Historians still argue whether those practices were entirely cultural or partially political. You stay quiet, not judging, just listening. She was clever, he says. Too clever. Loved riddles more than dresses. Would rather teach a parrot to lie than train a servant to obey. You like her already. She told me once, he continues, that obedience was just fear in costume. I didn't know whether to applaud or be terrified. Did you marry her? You ask. He nods. I did. And at first, it was like walking into a room full of mirrors. Beautiful, but exhausting. Everything I thought I knew. She made me question every decision I made. She twisted into a game. He taps the box. It shifts slightly. What's in there? You ask. In time, he says, voice steady. First, the downfall. Because of course there's always a downfall. She found a book, he says. Old, bound in skin. You grimace. Don't worry. He smirks. Not human. Probably camel. Very ethical. Small comfort. She studied it obsessively. He continues. It was about transformation, shifting souls between bodies. At first, she used mice, then goats, then, well, you lean in. One morning, he says, I woke up in the body of a dog. You blink, hard, a lean, scruffy mutt. He continues. Not even a handsome breed, just something pathetic and limping. She looked down at me and said, now maybe you'll be loyal. Then she laughed and locked the door. You whistle. That's dark, he nods. She kept me like that for 2 years. I watched her marry again, saw her flirt with passing travelers, and every night, I slept in the ashes by the fire. The box moves again. The thump is louder now. Desperate. How did you escape? You ask. An old servant recognized me, he says. I had a scar on my paw, where a horse had bitten me in childhood. She wept, whispered a prayer, and went to the wise woman of the city. He smiles faintly. The wise woman wasn't impressed, she said. That's why you don't marry girls smarter than you? Then she spat in a bowl and mixed it with stardust. You wait, did it work? He shrugs. Mostly. I got my body back, but not my beard. She said those take longer to grow in this realm. You smile despite yourself. So what happened to her? He looks at the box. You look at the box. She's in there? You whisper. He nods. Not as punishment, as preservation. I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted her. Paused. You squint. Isn't that sort of worse? He gives a one-shoulder shrug. Possibly. Justice is always tangled. The box shudders again. You lean forward. And the djinn? Why did your story save the merchant? The second old man stands, box cradled in one arm. Because love makes fools of us, and sometimes revenge makes us interesting. That doesn't really answer the question. He smiles. Then you're listening correctly. The scroll in your lap flutters. A new line forms. To pause a storm is not to end it. You follow him to the edge of the courtyard. He sets the box down in the moonlight. It calms instantly. He looks back at you. You'll meet the third soon. He's the quietest of us, which usually means he's the most dangerous. Anything I should know? He considers. He owns birds. That's rarely a good sign. And with that, he's gone. Vanished into the dark like a well-timed metaphor. You stare at the box. It hums now. Not a sound, exactly, but a sensation. And you're left alone in the courtyard. Ink fountain burbling behind you. Scroll alive with story. And a locked box ticking softly under the stars. You leave the box behind. You tell yourself it's the smart thing to do. But really, it's because you're a little afraid it might whisper to you if you stay any longer. Whatever was inside, whether vengeance, regret, or just a very bitter ex-wife, it's someone else's locked room mystery now. The alley returns, as all good alleys do, moist, twisting, and vaguely scented like roasted almonds and long-dead secrets. Your feet move on their own, drawn by the scroll, which glows more brightly now, as if warming up for something grand. A distant flutter echoes overhead. Wings! Then silence. Then another flutter. You slow down. There's something about birds in old stories. They're never just birds. They're omens, messengers, cursed lovers, transformed wives, or, worst of all, watchers. You scan the shadows, expecting eyes. What you get is feathers, hundreds of them, scattered across the cobblestones like snow that forgot how to melt. And there he stands, the third old man. He doesn't look old, or even particularly man-like. He's thin, sure. His beard forks at the end like a snake's tongue. His cloak is stitched entirely from feathers. Falcon, crow, parrot, even the iridescent flash of a hummingbird if you squint. He holds a cane shaped like a beak, and perched on his shoulder is a falcon that doesn't blink. "I've been waiting," he says, voice low and calm, like rain slipping through pine needles. You try to come up with a joke about ornithology, but your mouth is dry. "I suppose," he continues, "you'd like to know why I volunteered to save the merchant?" You nod, obviously. "Well," he says, "it's not about love. It's not about pity. It's about debt. And wings." He turns, beckons, and you follow him into what appears to be a vast aviary built out of time. Cages hang in the air, unsupported. Birds trill and chirp and whisper in languages you don't recognize. "My brother," he says, "had a gift. He could talk to birds, not in metaphors or dreams, but truly speak their language." You're about to ask if that's even possible when he adds, "Historians still argue whether such abilities were myth, mental illness, or just very convincing hallucinations. You suppose all three are equally valid explanations. He taught me," the old man continues, "a few phrases. Enough to ask where the storms were, enough to apologize when I plundered their nests. You raise an eyebrow. I was a collector." He admits, "Rare eggs, exotic feathers. If it had wings, I wanted it on a shelf." You suddenly feel sorry for every bird in the cages. "There was one," he says, "a hoopoe, oldest of all. They say she'd flown between worlds. She sang dreams into people's heads. And let me guess," you say, "you tried to catch her?" He stops walking. "No," he says, "I did catch her." A long pause. "I put her in a cage made of silver and teeth, fed her fresh pomegranate and saffron, but she didn't sing. You feel something twist in your gut. Then one morning, she began to cry. A sound so soft it cracked the windows. The falcon on his shoulder rustles its wings. I opened the cage," he continues, "and she looked at me. Not in anger, in disappointment, which is always worse." "Did she leave?" you ask. "She didn't need to," he says. "I turned into a bird." Of course he did. "A large black crow," he adds. "Ungainly, unimpressive, mocked by the others." "And the djinn?" you prompt. He nods, fingers tightening around the cane. "She found me like that. The djinn took one look at me, laughed, and decided to make it worse." "How?" you ask. "She gave me speech, but only bird speech. I could talk, but no one could understand me, not even my brother." He walks over to a perch. A quiet pigeon stares back at him. "I wandered like that for 3 years, slept in rafters, ate breadcrumbs, watched humans forget how to wonder." "Then what changed?" "I met a boy," he says. "A mute child with a cracked flute. He listened. Not just heard, really listened." He exhales. So I taught him. Through song, through flight. He grew up and became a poet. Wrote verses that made old men cry and young women punch the air. You smile. Nice ending. Not quite, the old man says. The djinn returned, offered me a deal, my form back, for a price. What was it? He points at his falcon. She took the boy, not his life, his future. He never published, never spoke again. Just walked into the hills one day and disappeared. A soft silence fills the space. I carry this bird as a reminder, he says, that no story ends clean, and that some debts echo across feathers and time. You look around at the birds. Some have human eyes, others blink sideways. One murmurs your name. So, you say slowly, how did this save the merchant? The old man chuckles. Because I understand cages, and I know what it takes to survive inside one. The scroll flutters again, eager. He turns to you, one hand reaching up to scratch under the falcon's chin. Now go, he says. Your next step isn't with us. It's beneath the city. You frown. Beneath? He nods. Where the oldest story sleeps. The story that watches all the others. You back away slowly. And one more thing, he adds. If a bird offers you a wish, always ask who's listening. The air shifts. You're standing alone now, outside the aviary, which may or may not have existed. The scroll burns with new lines, 3 stories woven, 3 debts paid. But shadows linger where old wings fade. You look down. There's a stairwell that wasn't there before, carved into the stone, descending into a warm, golden dark. You sigh, always downward, always deeper, and you take the first step into the story that no one ever tells out loud. The air gets heavier with each step. You descend, following the winding stone stairwell as it curls like a snail's shell. The walls drip softly, somewhere between condensation and tears. You pass carvings of the stone, low-relief spirals of figures mid-transformation, man into beast, girl into flame, serpent into crown. Their eyes follow you, but in a lazy, half-dreamed way, like they've long since stopped caring who comes and who leaves. The scroll pulses faintly, casting a glow that's more memory than light. It flickers just enough to show you the uneven floor and keep your ankles from turning. You appreciate that. Your gratitude lasts until the first voice reaches you. A whisper. Female. Just ahead. You're early, she says. You hesitate. It's not the words. It's the tone. Not startled, not irritated, just amused. Like a cat watching a mouse who hasn't yet realized the cheese is fake. You round the bend. There she is. The djinn, but not the red-eyed smoke beast you feared. Not yet, anyway. She sits cross-legged on a floating circle of glass, her face half covered by a shimmering veil that seems to change pattern with her mood. Behind her? Nothing. Just air. Void. The kind that eats light and dreams. You feel your knees wobble. So, she says, you've heard their stories. You nod. And? You open your mouth to speak. But instead of words, a strange sound escapes. Like sand being poured into a bowl made of bone. She tilts her head, clearly delighted. The scroll has marked you. She purrs. It's taken something. You want to protest, but the part of you that knows what to say is missing. The rest of you, however, is wide awake. She stretches lazily. They've bought the merchant's life, she continues. 3 for 1. Generous, even by my standards. She waves a hand, and the air ripples. The merchant appears, not as flesh, but as a flickering thread of light, hanging mid-air, pulsing with worry. He's safe, she says, but safety's a cage, too. You glance at the thread. It hums softly. No obvious signs of distress. But that's not why you're here, the djinn adds. And for the first time, her voice dips into something slower. Sadder. You're here because you're part of it now. You don't like that. Every story leaves a trace, she says. But some people become stories. She slides off the glass, and it vanishes behind her. I was once like you, she whispers. Just curious, just asking questions. A swirl of smoke curls from her fingers. Inside it, a palace, then ruins, then a mirror. Historians still argue whether I was ever human, she muses, or if I was born from the first lie ever told. The scroll in your hand grows hot. Do you want to know the truth? She asks, stepping closer. About the merchant, the deer, the old men. About what really happened? You do. Of course you do. But something inside you, maybe your last ounce of sleepiness, or common sense, or the voice that used to belong to your conscience, warns, not all truth is bedtime material. Too late. She touches your forehead. Instantly, you're pulled backward, not falling, being yanked. Memory first, then skin, then breath. You find yourself in a courtyard of gold tiles and smoke. The sun is burning low. A woman kneels by a fountain, her hands red to the wrists, not with blood, but with crushed berries. She's whispering into the water. The language is old. It tastes of salt and almond. You realize you're inside the story of the deer, not the cleaned-up version, the real one. You watch as she calls for a djinn. Not one, but 3. Bargains, curses. A husband who vanishes for days and returns smelling of lilies and deceit. She doesn't turn him into a deer out of spite. She does it to protect herself. To punish him? Sure, but also to freeze time, to give herself room to breathe. She weeps afterward. You never got that detail before. You're flung again, this time to a marketplace at dusk. A boy watches his father crumble into sand after reading from a book with no spine. A merchant packs incense, muttering about camels and curses. A goat dances. A storyteller is beheaded for accidentally pronouncing the name of an extinct god. The scenes are blurry, jumbled, but one thread runs through them all. The djinn, she's always there, watching, sometimes helping, often laughing. Once, she's the wind in the trees. Another time, a girl with a wooden arm, always curious, always close. You return to yourself with a jolt. Back in the stairwell, the djinn is gone. In her place, a feather, iridescent, larger than your hand. It hums with warmth. The scroll shimmers again, and new words burn into its surface. The 4th tale has not been told, and it never will, unless you do it. You exhale shakily. The feather is light in your hands, too light, like it could carry a burden, or a promise, or a curse. Behind you, the stairwell begins to collapse. One step at a time. You run, because that's what people do when the walls of story close in. You run until you reach a new tunnel. This one dry, older, a tunnel of bricks and dried herbs, smelling faintly of cinnamon, old paper, and forgotten prayers. The kind of place librarians dream about and rats form kingdoms in. You slow, catching your breath. The walls are lined with scrolls. Too many. Some sing softly. Others weep. One calls you by your childhood nickname and makes you feel irrationally judged. You come to a stop in front of a doorway, carved into the wood above it. What is written may sleep, but it never dies. You swallow. The scroll in your hand grows cool, then silent. You push the door open. Inside, a desk, a single candle, a blank scroll, and a quill made from the feather you now carry. Looks like it's your turn. You sit, and you begin to write. The first letter you write shivers as it dries, not from the ink, but from something deeper. You get the sense the feather quill doesn't need you to write. It's guiding your hand, gently but firmly, as if the story already exists, and you're just revealing it line by line. The words form faster than your thoughts. You are the fourth storyteller, they say. You are the final witness. Well, that's not ominous at all. The room is silent except for the scratch of the quill and the occasional creak. Wood adjusting to your presence, or maybe something larger shifting in the walls. You glance at the shelves. Scrolls tilt in your direction. Nosy and ancient, clearly eager to eavesdrop. Somewhere in the back, one of them starts humming the melody to a song you're sure no humans ever heard. Your candle flickers, and just like that, the story returns. You're no longer in the quiet archive, but in a courtyard wreathed in moonlight. The merchant stands at its center again, this time older, wearier, and staring at the empty space where the djinn had last appeared. He holds nothing. No scroll, no sand. Just the memory of those 3 strange tales and the weight of his own skin. Around him, the old men have vanished. No lion, no deer, no mule, gone like mist. As if they were only real for the bargain, and once paid, their stories reverted to dust. But something nags at him, something that won't sit still in the back of his mind. He reaches into his robe and finds a single object he doesn't remember packing. A feather. You laugh softly. Of course, because this tale, like most in the 1001 Nights, refuses to close neatly. There's always a splinter, a question left unfiled, like, was the deer ever really a man? Or, did the merchant dream it all while struck by desert fever? Or better yet, are you, yes, you, still dreaming this now, curled under your covers, drifting somewhere between narration and nightmare? Historians still argue whether this entire story originated from Indian folklore, or Persian myth, or some long-lost Babylonian epic that came wrapped in the perfume of forgotten languages. One scholar in the 19th century even insisted the original tale featured a demonic bird instead of a djinn and a speaking frog as the judge. You wish that version had survived? It sounds way more theatrical. But what has survived, unquestionably, is the pull, that undeniable lure that keeps you leaning forward, desperate for the next line. The merchant turns, exiting the courtyard. He walks not back to the city, but into the hills, into a place that once belonged to shepherds and now belongs to silence. He finds a stone bench, crumbling but steady, and there, under a crooked fig tree, he sits and begins to speak. Not to anyone in particular, to the wind, the stars, the gods that have long since forgotten their own names. He tells new stories, not of jinn or beasts, but of loss, of patience, of walking through storms without asking why, of waiting beside trees and listening to the language of leaves. You watch from a distance. He doesn't know you're there. But maybe he does. Maybe. Somehow. This moment echoes both backward and forward, into your world, into your time, into that quiet space between teeth brushing and sleep, where reality blurs and fairy tales slip through the cracks. You blink and he's gone. Now you're somewhere else entirely. A royal chamber, silk drapes, lanterns flickering like nervous fireflies. A young woman sits cross-legged on a pile of pillows, her eyes sharp, her voice steady. She's telling a story to a king with murder in his blood and insomnia in his bones. You recognize her. Scheherazade. She's threading the merchant's tale into another, and another, and another, spinning the night out longer, weaving time with words. You realize this wasn't just a single story. It was one bead in a necklace long enough to wrap around the moon twice. each tale a loop, each character a whisper through the centuries. The djinn, one of many. The old man, echoes. The merchant, a stand-in for all of us, trapped in danger, bargaining with the unknown, saved by empathy disguised as story. You sit beside Scheherazade now. She doesn't stop. Her voice is quiet, but unyielding, like rain on old tile. The king watches her, mesmerized. Not just because she's clever, but because she's showing him what it means to remember humanity. One tale at a time. Let me tell you about the first old man and the deer. She begins again, her tone a little different. Not better, just evolved. You realize this is a new version, a revision, one in which the deer speaks, in which the wife regrets, in which forgiveness becomes possible, even if never granted. This is how stories grow. They molt, they shed skins. They become truer by becoming stranger. And this time, when the story ends, the king does not fall asleep. He weeps, not because it's sad, but because it finally made him feel something real, something ancient, something dangerously soft. Scheherazade gently touches his hand. "You're safe now," she says. Not because of magic, because of meaning. You awaken, if that's the right word, back in the archive. The feather quill is dry. The candle has melted into a pool of wax, shaped like a sleeping dog. The scroll in front of you bears the words you didn't know you were capable of writing. A full retelling. Honest, twisted, gentle where it needs to be, and slightly unhinged in the right corners. You look around. No djinn, no merchant, just you. The shelves, and the echo of voices told long before you were born. You roll up the scroll. It hums contentedly, like a cat with a full belly. You place it back on the shelf. As you do, one of the older scrolls leans toward you and murmurs, "Good job." You try not to be alarmed. Instead, you smile and walk back toward the door. It creaks open before you touch it. Beyond it, the world waits. Not a world of certainty, but one in which a tale well told can still save a life, or at least make bedtime feel less lonely. You step into the dark, feeling lighter, because you've now become what every story secretly hopes for, a witness who listens. The door closes behind you, but you don't hear it shut. It might not even be a door anymore, just a memory of hinges and wood and whatever passed for safety in that place. You're somewhere else now. It's not entirely clear how you got here. Then again, it never is with stories like this. You're in a desert, or close enough. The sand rolls in slow hills like someone paused the ocean mid-breath. The moon above is too large, too bright. It looks down at you with a knowing smirk, the kind that says, "I've seen things. There are no stars tonight." You walk. Your feet don't sink into the sand. It's firmer than it should be, like compact memory. Each step carries you further from the archive and deeper into the tale, the one you thought ended, but clearly hasn't. Ahead, a flickering glow, a small fire, a figure seated beside it, wrapped in a patterned cloak. You can't see their face, but you know this person. You know the tilt of their head, the slow way they lifts a hand in greeting. The merchant, still alive, still telling stories. He gestures to the spot across the fire. You sit. The sand is warm beneath you, and it smells faintly of saffron and smoke. A pot simmers over the flames. Not stew, something sweeter. Cardamom, perhaps rosewater. You don't speak. You don't need to. He nods once, then begins again. This time, the story isn't about him. Not directly. It's about his wife. Yes, the one who, according to the djinn's accusation, was nearly sacrificed for a fruit. But here, under the moon, things shift. She wasn't wicked, he murmurs. Just scared. And suddenly, you're there, inside her world. She's younger than you expected. Clever eyes, fingers stained with herbs. She has her own shop, tucked between a tanner and a spice merchant, where she sells tinctures and salves. People whisper that she cures infertility and curses lovers and tames wild spirits. She mostly just brews tea. One day, a man enters her shop, tall, handsome, harmless, or so she thinks. You see her warm to him, not at first, but gradually. The way a door learns to swing a little wider each time it's opened. But this man, this supposed charmer, he's no customer. He's a trickster, sent by a rival, maybe even a djinn in disguise, or a sorcerer playing the long game. He gives her a ring, enchanted, a tiny thing, slips it on her finger with a laugh and a lie. By the time she notices what's happening, how her will weakens, how her thoughts bend, it's too late. The merchant finds out. He's not angry, he's afraid of what she might do while bound by that cursed metal. Afraid the djinn who created it might not stop with one victim. So he takes her to the hills, not to punish, but to break the enchantment. And that's where the deer appears. A creature, yes, but also an echo of the spell gone wrong. The transformation is part rescue, part accident. He never meant for it to last this long, but djinn magic is stubborn, and time warps under its weight. Historians still argue whether the original tale casts the wife as villain or victim. Some say it was a morality tale. Don't trust women with power, blah blah. While others see it as a coded warning about enchantment, desire, and how quickly love curdles when you don't understand its shape. You, however, are leaning towards the third option. Complicated people make complicated decisions. And stories always simplify too much. The fire crackles. The merchant sips the strange tea. Offers you some. It tastes like ginger and regret. You ask him, quietly, if he ever found her again. If the spell was ever lifted. If the deer ever turned back into the woman he once knew. He smiles, not the happy kind. She was smarter than I was, he says. She found her way out. And you see her, just for a moment, running across a different desert. Free and wild, antlers catching the sun like old gold. Not waiting for rescue, not trapped by magic, just herself. You wonder if she ever told her side of the story. Maybe she's the next scroll, the next tale waiting for breath. Then the sand shifts. The merchant vanishes. The fire snuffs itself out with a sigh. You're not surprised. Stories like this always know when to leave you staring into the dark. A fringe theory, you heard it once in a dusty forum, probably written by someone with too much time and a degree in comparative mythology, suggests that 1001 Nights is a coded rebellion, that every wife, sister, girl, and witch in these tales is secretly Scheherazade herself, masked and scattered across 1,000 skins, telling the king what he refuses to hear, over and over, until he listens. You're starting to believe it, because when you close your eyes, you hear her voice again, weaving around you like silk thread, not coercing you into sleep, but inviting you to remember, to imagine, to wonder what story might be buried under your own skin. You lie down on the warm sand. It cradles you. You hear a deer running, far in the distance. Not afraid, not hunted, just moving forward. And in that moment, under the massive, smirking moon, you realize something. The tale isn't over. Not yet. You just turn the page. You wake, or at least you think you do, to the scent of fresh parchment and something charred, like cloves left too long in the pan. The desert is gone. The moon has shrunk back to its usual size. And you are not alone. No fire this time. Just a low table, a scroll half unfurled, and an old man, who may or may not be blind, dipping a stylus in ink. He doesn't look up. "You've come far," he says, voice rasping like sand on stone. "But you've yet to understand the stakes." He beckons, and you lean in. The parchment is covered in lines, waves, dots, nothing resembling words, unless you read in dreams. But as your eyes adjust, you realize what you're seeing isn't writing. It's a map. No roads, no cities, just stories, each one woven into the next, overlapping, spiraling, and at the center, a circle, a tale unfinished, the old man murmurs. The story that holds the rest together? Your breath catches, because you know exactly which story that is. You point. The first old man, the deer, the fruit that fell, the gin that rose, the judgment that never quite added up. That's the story you're circling, the one that started all of this. And now, apparently, it's back. The old man gestures, and once again, you're pulled forward. This time, it's to the day after the jinn's sentencing, the moment the merchant returns home with his dear wife. You expect peace, a quiet reconciliation, a sheepish chuckle over how wild it all was. You get none of that. The town is in chaos. The streets hum with rumor. Some say the merchant made a pact with the desert demons. Others whisper that he's not the same man who left. His beard's too dark, his smile too thin. People don't trust a man who survives a jinn. And his wife? Still a deer, still silent. He builds a pen for her behind the house, shaded and dry. He feeds her dates soaked in honey, speaks to her as though she can reply. And perhaps she can. Somewhere in there. But if she does, it's not with words. It's with posture. With the way she avoids his eyes when he brings her fruit. You feel the ache in both of them. Two lives stitched back together with coarse thread. Then, one day, a visitor arrives. A woman. Young, but with the poise of someone who's read every room twice. She wears blue. Not the rich indigo of royalty, but a clever shade that doesn't stain with travel. She claims to be a scribe. Says she's been sent by the Sultan to gather tales of magic gone wrong. The merchant eyes her warily, but he lets her in. She stays 3 days, sleeps on a cot by the fire, spends her mornings watching the deer and her evenings asking odd, precise questions. Do you ever dream in her voice? Does the fruit still grow in your orchard? Did the jinn name a price beyond your life? Each time, the merchant answers, but never directly. You get the sense that he doesn't fully understand the story he's in. The scribe knows more than she lets on. You see her one night, writing furiously in a hidden notebook. Her fingers are stained with ink and something metallic. She hums an old lullaby, one you haven't heard since childhood. A tune that suggests she may not be from this century at all. On her last day, she touches the deer's muzzle, says softly, "You were never the one cursed, were you?" And the deer leans forward, just slightly. The merchant doesn't hear, but you do. That night, something shifts. You feel it in the air, in the way the house creaks, like it's exhaling, in the silence that thickens into presence. The deer disappears. No struggle, no noise, just gone. The merchant weeps, though he won't admit it. He searches the hills, offers coins to travelers, leaves bowls of fruit by the edge of the forest. But the deer doesn't return, and neither does the scribe. Some say she was a spirit, a jinn in disguise, come to free her sister. Others say she was Scheherazade herself, moving through stories like a ghost, untangling knots no man could fix. Historians still argue whether this segment was added later, an attempt to reframe the tale in more progressive light. But the language is old, the metaphor even older. You ask the old man with the stylus why you've been shown this part now. He finally looks up, and his eyes, yes, both, are clear. You needed to see what happens when a tale is only half heard, he says. He dips his stylus again and draws a single line through the center of the parchment. Not erasing, underlining. You look again, and the map has changed. Now the circle at the center pulses. Open! Waiting. The old man gestures toward it. You're nearly at the end, he says. But not the conclusion. A breeze cuts through the air, laced with the scent of pomegranate. The table vanishes. So does he. And you? You're falling. Back into the scroll. Back into the story. Back toward the merchant, the djinn, the court, the judgment, the truth that was always more layered than it seemed. The world blurs. The words tighten. And ahead, on the horizon, you see her. Not the deer, the woman she was. Waiting and smiling, like she's finally ready to speak. You land softly, as if caught by a quilt of wind. No jolt, no whiplash, just a hush, and the faint sense that someone has been expecting you. The landscape is familiar, but changed. It's the merchant's courtyard again, the one with the orange trees and the sun-baked stones. But now it's dusk, and the air is heavy with jasmine. Somewhere nearby, a fountain trickles, slow and deliberate, like it's reciting poetry in a tongue you almost understand. She stands near the fountain. Not the deer, the woman. Yes, his wife, fully restored, no longer cloven-hoofed or fur-clad. Her hair is bound in copper thread, her robes thick and dark like the sky before a sandstorm. She looks stronger now, as if the time she spent walking on 4 legs gave her clarity no human years ever had. And she sees you. About time, she says, arching a brow. You blink. Not because she's real, but because you weren't expecting her to talk to you. You're wondering how I returned. Yes, you are. It wasn't magic, she says, walking slowly along the edge of the fountain. Or maybe it was, but not the kind that sparkles, turns out. When the scribe left, she didn't just vanish. She left something behind. A small obsidian token carved with a single glyph. A deer's eye. Wide open. The merchant didn't know what it was, but his wife did, the moment he set it down near her feeding bowl. The air shimmered, and the curse broke, simple, sudden, and wholly unexplained. Even now, historians debate the meaning of the glyph. Some say it represents transformation. Others say it's not a glyph at all, but a warning, or a name, or a mirror. She doesn't clarify. What she does explain, though, is what came next. The town didn't rejoice. No parades, no welcoming committee. In fact, the people were unsettled by her return. Too clean, too sudden, too miraculous. And miracles, as you well know by now, make people uneasy. She chose to leave, not out of spite, not even grief, just necessity. I had to find the story. She tells you, dipping her fingers in the water. The real one, not just the one he told the djinn. She means the merchant, because that story, the one you heard back in section 2, back when you thought you knew what was going on, it wasn't the whole truth. Not even close. Let's revisit the basics, shall we? The merchant kills a fruit-bearing demon by accident. A djinn appears, demanding blood for blood. The merchant is granted a year to settle his affairs. He returns. 3 old men try to buy his life by sharing tales of misfortune. One of them, her husband, tells a tale about turning his unfaithful wife into a deer. Except she never was unfaithful. Not to him. Her betrayal, if it can even be called that, was something deeper. She had a sister, one born cursed, deer-born, mute, a djinn's child. And she'd hidden her for years, protected her, fed her, loved her. When the merchant discovered the hidden room, filled with antlers and straw bedding, he assumed the worst, as men do. She tried to explain. He didn't listen, so she made a choice. to become what he thought she was, to protect her sister one last time, and because magic, like stories, responds to belief, she did become the deer. The transformation was both literal and symbolic, one of those ancient paradoxes that keeps folklore scholars awake at night. Was she punished? Did she punish herself? Or was it the story punishing everyone? Historians still argue whether her shape-shifting was a metaphor, a magical rite, or simply a narrative device meant to challenge male-centric authority. Regardless, it worked. She bought time, enough time for the scribe to arrive, for the truth to calcify, for the merchant to realize. Too late. What he'd never asked. Now she walks alone, not bitter, just whole. She travels from city to city, telling her story. Quietly, carefully, only to those who listen with their mouths closed and their minds ajar. She's even gathered a small following, mostly women, some men, all of them with stories they were never allowed to finish. You ask her why she's telling you all this. She smiles. Because you've come this far without closing your eyes. Then she adds, a little softer. And because there's one part left, you follow her gaze to a narrow doorway behind the fountain, one you hadn't noticed before. She nods. Go on, he's waiting. So you step through, and you're back in the courtyard again. But not the one you just left. This one is empty, dusty, abandoned. The orange trees are bare, the stones cracked. No fountain sings, no wife waits. Just the merchant, alone, old now, or maybe always old. His eyes carry the weight of someone who's replayed the same story every night, hoping the ending might change. He looks up. I lied, he says simply. Not defensively, just resigned. He tells you everything, though most of it you already know now. He feared weakness more than truth. He feared ridicule more than loss. So he twisted the story and paid the price. You sit beside him as night falls, listening to the wind scrape across broken stone. And for a moment, the silence between you feels like forgiveness. He asks, did she find peace? You don't answer, because that's not your tale to close. Instead, you rise, turn toward the door, and walk back through it, into a swirl of parchment, moonlight, whispers, and one last story waiting to be heard. The world unfolds like an ancient scroll, edges curling inward, words glowing faintly as though lit from behind by candlelight. You step forward, and yes, it's a library now, but not the silent, stiff kind with polished desks and no food signs. No, this is a dream library, one stitched from memory and myth. Shelves curve into impossible arches. Some spiral upward into smoke, others vanish mid-air. Their books stacked in neat hovering piles that sway like boats on still water. You smell old parchment, honey, and something else. Saffron, maybe, or dates soaked in rose water. And then you see her. Not the wife, not the deer, not even Scheherazade. This one wears ink-stained robes and a circlet of copper script. Her fingers are smudged with charcoal. A scribe, perhaps. Or something older. She beckons with a wink. Time for the footnotes, she says. The final stretch of the tale. Not the plot, but the echo behind it. You sit, or maybe you float. It's not important anymore. She begins. You learn that stories like these, ones tucked inside other stories, were called nested tales, or frame narratives, like Russian dolls, only sneakier. 1001 Nights isn't just a number, it's a structure. Each tale buys one more day, one more breath. Scholars debate whether the first known manuscript of 1001 Nights came from 8th century Persia or 9th century Iraq. The truth is slipperier. Some say it was based on an even older Indian collection called Panchatantra. Others claim it evolved from Greek romance epics absorbed through trade. And the deer? She's not in every version. Some texts end after the djinn grants the merchant his life. Others skip the three old men altogether. So how did the first old man and the deer become such a central tale? Well, that's the twist. It didn't. Not really. It survived through oral retellings, scribes who couldn't bear to cut it, and generations of listeners who thought, wait, this one's different. Because it was a tale of transformation told by a man, but about a woman who had no voice until you stopped to wonder why. Some say the deer's voice was the earliest trace of feminist subversion in medieval Arabic literature. Others say that's just wishful retrofitting. But then again, historians still argue whether folklore reflects culture or shapes it. You imagine the scribe nodding. The answer, she says, is always yes. She gestures to a table covered in scrolls. You walk over and notice a few titles. Alternate endings of the Deer Wife Tale, Comparative Symbolism, Antlers and Agency, Oaths, Animals, and Marital Breakdown in Early Caliphate Literature. And your favorite, He turned her into what? You flip one open. Inside are countless variations of the same tale. In one, the wife turns the merchant into a donkey for 20 years before relenting. In another, she becomes a bird instead, flying to a kingdom of winged sages. In yet another, she never changes at all, just vanishes, leaving behind a poem written in ash. These stories, she says, are more than entertainment. They're blueprints of emotion, records of what people feared, wanted, or couldn't say aloud. In a world where scribes were often male, it's worth noting how many female voices still slipped through, disguised as witches, wives, queens, and yes, dear. You ask the scribe if the merchant ever truly repented. She shrugs. That depends on who's telling the story. Some versions let him fade into regret. Others grant him wisdom, even a second wife. But most just leave him on the road, with a sack of coins and a story that gets lighter each time he tells it. The scribe snaps her fingers, and a map unrolls mid-air. Not a map of places, but of tales. Dotted lines connect motifs. Betrayal, transformation, redemption, ambiguity. Some loops never close. There's a glittering path labeled Tales That Are Also Traps, and another called Stories That Whisper Instead of Roar. You trace the route of the first old man and the deer, and realize it doesn't end where you thought. It keeps splitting. New paths branching toward stories you've already heard without knowing their name. One such branch leads directly to Beauty and the Beast. Another, to the Wife of Bath. And if you squint, you can even see it weaving into Black Mirror episodes. She catches your expression. Nothing truly dies, she says. Especially stories. You glance down and find a book in your lap. It's warm. Breathing. Maybe. Its cover is soft. Like old leather. No title. Just a single symbol. The Deer's Eye. You open it. Blank pages, except one. It says, in careful ink, "You were part of the story all along." The scribe leans in. Ready for the last turn? And just like that, you're no longer in the library. You're outside. In a market square at dawn, everything smells of bread, wood smoke, and citrus. A man is shouting about saffron prices. A woman brushes her daughter's hair beside a basin. You're not watching anymore. You're walking. A goat nudges your leg. You swear it winks. The world feels real, and not like it could fall into parchment at any moment. But for now, it holds. And as the sun crests the horizon, you hear it. Hoofbeats. Slow. Rhythmic. Not a threat. Not quite music. Just the sound of someone or something still walking. Still telling. Still searching for the next listener. You follow the sound. Because of course you do. You keep walking. Heel to dusty heel. Toward that fading echo of hoofbeats. But the market is shifting underfoot. Stones ripple like cloth. Stalls blink in and out like candlelight in wind. And when you blink, you're not walking anymore. You're drifting, gently, slowly, as though sleep itself has taken the reins. You find yourself in a new place, not a palace, not a cave, something stranger. It's a field, empty, silent. Just a single tree standing in the center, tall and crooked. Beneath it, a man sits cross-legged, back to the trunk. He's wrapped in a heavy cloak, face buried in his hands. You don't speak? You know this part? He lifts his head. His eyes are red, but not from tears, from dust, from time. His beard has gone white, but you know him. The first old man, the one with the deer. He doesn't look surprised to see you. Just tired? You came late, he says softly. But not too late. You sit beside him. The wind makes the tree creak, and for a moment you think it's laughing. He points out across the field. You see nothing but mist. She's out there, he says. Somewhere. Do you still look for her? You ask. His lips twitch. Not always. Sometimes I just sit here. Sometimes I talk to people who look like you. You raise an eyebrow. Storytellers? He shrugs. Listeners. You notice something in his lap. A small wooden box, carved with patterns you can't quite identify. Part antler, part spiral, part script. He opens it. Inside is nothing, or so it seems. Then you see it. A single hair, fine and golden, curling like the letter C. He closes the box gently. You never forget the one who turned you into something else, he says. Even when you've long since turned back. The wind rustles the grass, and in it, you hear voices. Hundreds, thousands. Not all are human. Some bark, some chime. One unmistakably meows. That one makes you smile. Of course the cats would be here. He leans back against the tree. Do you think she forgave me? He asks. Voice no louder than a breeze. You don't answer. You don't have to. The tree answers for you, dropping a single orange leaf that lands in his palm. He nods. Good enough. You close your eyes. And for a moment the world folds inward. Everything from the tale, the merchant, the demon, the oath, the brothers, the beasts, the bizarre love story stitched through fur and fury. It all folds into one quiet feeling. That stories, no matter how strange, always end up telling us about ourselves. That no one gets out unchanged. That maybe, just maybe, you're a little deer too. And the man beside you? He begins to hum. A low, slow tune, like a cradle song from a land that no longer exists. His voice is cracked but steady, and as he sings, the mist lifts. Just a little. You see a woman standing far off, not waving, just watching. Her eyes are wide, her face unreadable. And yet, you know her. The deer, the wife, the storyteller. You! She turns, disappears into the tall grass. And somehow, you're fine with that. You're not meant to follow. You're meant to remember. The old man rests his head on your shoulder. The wind stops. The field stills. And just as sleep starts to tug at you for real, you hear the softest, sleepiest whisper. You made it to the end? Wind down. 300 words. And now, it's time to drift away. The story has curled its final page closed, and you've walked all the way from market to mountain, palace to pasture, tale to tale. The hoofbeats have faded, the sand has settled, the lamp has gone out, and you? You're safe? Warm? Exactly where you need to be. The air around you softens, like cotton pressed against skin. Every sound slows. The room stretches outward, wide and deep like a dream you're about to enter. You can feel the weight of your own heartbeat calming, each beat like a lullaby in your chest. There's no more mystery to chase tonight. No demons to bargain with. No lovers to forgive. Just quiet. Just sleep. So let the echoes of Scheherazade's voice linger a moment longer, threading through your thoughts like silk. Let your muscles melt into the mattress. Your breath deepen. Your thoughts loosen. You've wandered far tonight, but there's no need to go further. Let the field, the deer, the stories, they can all wait. They'll still be there tomorrow. Maybe in a dream, maybe in a whisper, maybe in that strange little moment when you open your eyes and can't quite remember where you are, but still feel like you've traveled somewhere important. For now, let the silence gather around you like dusk. And let go! You're home.